Good evening. With a nod from Jeanette, I'd like to call to order tonight's meeting of the City of Santa Barbara Board of Harbor Commissioners for August 21st, 2014. Jeanette, would you please call roll?
Yes, Bill Spicer.
Here.
Jim Sloan.
Here.
Corey Bantelin. Betsy Kramer.
Present.
Dennis Power.
Here.
Helene Webb. Here. And Stephen McIntosh will not be here.
Very good. Mr. Reedman, any changes to the agenda tonight?
Mr. Chair, no changes to the agenda tonight. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. This is the time for public comment for anything not on the agenda. See that we'll open that and close that. Thank you. In a little bit of a different move, we have a commission matter to do before the approval of the minutes.
Yes. Item 1, Budget Committee Assignment Recommendation that Harbor Commission A, appoint a third member to the Budget Committee, and B, reaffirm the remaining Harbor Commission committee assignments as selected at the July 17, 2014 Commission meeting.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, good evening. Commissioner Kramer has served on the Budget Committee for 5 years, since July of 2009, and last month she notified the department that she would be willing to step down and open up a spot for another person that might want to participate in the Budget Committee. So tonight we're going to take nominations or volunteers to serve on the Budget Committee. And it's an important committee for the department. In the last 5 years, it's met approximately 14 times to discuss budget matters as we develop the budget and the capital improvement plan, compared to some of our other committees, such as the Marina Reconstruction Committee, which met 4 times in the last 5 years, the Parking Committee, which met 3 times last year, the Request for Proposal Committee, which met twice in the last 5 years, but will be meeting again soon, I'm sure, and the Chartering and Business Activity Permit Committee, which has met once in the last 5 years. So, as you can see, 14 is it's by far our busiest committee. So, with that, I'll turn it over to the chair for the.
Commissioner Kramer, did you have something?
I'd like to nominate Dennis Power, please.
Mr. Chairman, Betsy, thank you. I'd be happy to accept that nomination.
Very good. Are there any other nominees for this position or volunteers? Okay, I'll close the nomination. I believe we need to affirm this with a vote. All in favor of Commissioner Power joining the Budget Committee, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions?
Second the motion.
Sorry, thank you.
That's okay. Just to be.
Detail.
Got to speak up. I want to make sure the notes are correct.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Congratulations.
Happy.
Also, I guess we should probably just reaffirm what we selected last month as well, and just reaffirm the selections to the rest of the committees that we made last month.
Very good. I'd call for a recommendation to accept the committees that we made last month.
I'll make that motion. Before we do that,
Oh.
just ask a question. So
Certainly.
Why would this not be part of the minutes from last?
Because because we had to change the Budget Committee. So we took it out of the minutes
Okay. So it will become part of the minutes
next month.
this month? I would second the motion.
Very good. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
I'm sorry, to accept the committees as we establish them on our.
That was the motion.
Yes, okay. Please say aye if you're in favor. Aye. Any abstentions? Any nays? That passes. Thank you. Now we will move to approval of the minutes. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Is there a second? Very good. All in favor of approval of the minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Abstentions? Nays? No. Minutes are approved. Moving on to the director's report. Mr. Reedman.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, in terms of council actions, since we met last month, the council approved a lease amendment with Conway Vineyards, the wine tasting room on Stearns Wharf, which serves to allocate the annual base rent of $51,600 seasonally to allow for a lower base rent in the slower winter months and a higher base rent during the busier summer months, but it's the same amount of annual base rent and the 10% percentage rent. And this is common with the waterfront businesses are so seasonal that probably the majority at this point have amended their leases in this manner. The council also approved a 5-year license agreement with Commercial Fishermen of Santa Barbara, Inc. for the berthing of commercial fishing boats, mostly urchin boats and black cod, on the north side of Cabrillo Landing in front of the Waterfront Center building on what's commonly known as the CUDA dock, California Urchin Divers Association. The council also awarded a contract with Bellingham Marine Industries in their low bid amount of $6,851,000 for the construction of the Marina One replacement project, the final 4 phases, 5 through 8, and authorized the Public Works Director to execute the contract and approve expenditures up to $342,000 to cover any change orders that might arise. And as part of that, the council also authorized the Waterfront Director to execute a contract with URS in the amount of $64,000 for engineering construction support services. Moving on to the fall CMANC meeting, the California Marine Affairs and Navigation Conference will take place in San Francisco on September 16th to 18th, and I'll be attending the conference. Look forward to speaking with representatives from the Corps and Department of Boating and Waterways and so forth. Also, Commissioner McIntosh has expressed an interest in attending and will probably attend as well. Since the timing of the conference conflicts with the usual Harbor Commission date, we'll send a notice to cancel the September 18th regular meeting and reschedule the Harbor Commission meeting for the following Thursday, the 25th of September. So hopefully that'll meet with enough schedules. Tentative items for the September meeting, the fiscal year 2014 year-end budget review, also the local coastal program update, and vessel definition. And finally, I'd like to introduce our new administrative analyst for the department. After nearly 18 years of working at the Waterfront Department, Brian Slagle, who was the former administrative analyst, retired last week. We wish Brian all the best in his future endeavors. We had a little lunch going away thing for him last week at the department. Dominique Samario is the new administrative analyst. She started on August 4th, so we were fortunate enough to have almost 2-week overlap. And she took that position. Previously spent over 5 years producing and hosting a variety of programs for our own City TV Channel 18, and has also worked for County Television and TV Santa Barbara. Has extensive experience in nonprofit administration and communication, most recently working for United Way and also the Citizens Planning Association, and recently completed her professional marketing certificate at UCSB. And she's happy and excited to be joining the Waterfront Department. The administrative analyst is kind of a behind-the-scenes position. You don't see that here in front of the commission, but it's responsible for analytical research, report writing, a lot of support for all of our managers, and event coordination such as the upcoming Harbor Festival and Parade of Lights, technical support to management staff again, public outreach to organizations such as the Merchants Association, Downtown Santa Barbara, Chamber of Commerce, Visit Santa Barbara, Navy League for Navy ship visits, and coordinating cruise ship visits has actually gobbled up quite a bit of the time of the administrative analyst. Dominique will also research grant opportunities, is doing so right now, and assist in the development of the department budget, interface with print, radio, and television media, and serve as the department's public information officer. And Dominique, if you would like to introduce yourself, please.
Welcome.
Hi, so thank you very much for the introduction, Scott, and thank you for letting me take a brief amount of your time to say hello. I know you have a lot of exciting presentations this evening, but I did want to say hi and say how excited I am to be here. I'm very grateful to be the new administrative analyst, and I'm really excited to use my skills and bring them to the Waterfront Department and for the good of the community. So I'm excited to be here, and this marks the end of week 3. So hopefully with many more successful weeks to come. So thank you again, and I look forward to working with you.
Very good. Welcome aboard. Any questions for Mr. Reedman?
Yes.
Please.
Did I hear correctly that the Bellingham Marine Industries contract is for the final phase of Marina One, or is this an interim phase?
This is for the final Commissioner Power, this is for the final 4 phases.
Okay, so this will take care of this will complete your work then?
Yes, it will.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much.
Any others? Thank you, Mr. Reedman, and again, welcome, Ms. Samario. We move on to Mr. Bossy and the Business Services Report.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. My first order of business on the Business Services Report is the fact that a longtime harbor business, Transpac Marine, officially closed its doors on July 31st, 2014. Mr. Kirby Spicer and his business, Transpac Marine, have supplied the harbor community and the public with marine hardware and supplies for many, many decades. He chose not to continue his month-to-month lease, and we are currently, waterfront staff is currently cleaning up the site. It was left in great order, but we're just going through and making sure everything's taken down. And we are currently evaluating possible needs and options for the waterfront community for that 493 square foot space. And I believe Mr. Spicer goes back as far as the late 50s as being a part of the harbor. So we wish him well in his future. And then next item is leasing activity. So every August, we talk a little bit about the previous year, fiscal year's leasing activity. And leases generally fluctuate. We kind of spread them out over the years so they don't all gang up on us at once, if you will, and have 50 leases to do in 1 year, because you would be here for a long time every time we meet. So in fiscal year 2012, we had 11 leases. Fiscal year 13, we had 7. And in fiscal year 14, we had 3. So it was a little slower on the lease side of things for fiscal year 14, but they were big ones. The first was the NOAA Shearwater. We negotiated and executed a 5-year lease for mooring space for the Shearwater, the research vessel. And then we also had an amendment, Chuck's Waterfront Grill. As you know, part of the Channel Islands National Marine Sanctuary moved out to UCSB, vacating a couple of their offices, keeping a couple, but vacating, I believe, 3. And then Chuck's Waterfront had essentially the first right of refusal, and is now occupying those office spaces vacated. And the last one we did for fiscal year 14 was the Shoreline Beach Cafe, another very good tenant. It's going to be around for quite some time, as they negotiated a 10-year lease with 2 5-year options. And we're happy that they're going to be around for some time. They're doing great business over there. And then coming up for fiscal year 15, we have actually 4 leases or agreements to negotiate, and we've come out of the start of July firing, and we've already got 2 of those before your Harbor Commission, and they've actually both been to City Council, as Mr. Reedman discussed, the Commercial Fishermen of Santa Barbara, as well as Conway Vineyards. And then 2 upcoming are the Harbor Mail Center, which is due up the end of October, and the Santa Barbara Sailing Club. And so we're going to be entering negotiations with those folks in the short term and figuring out what they want to do and where things are going with their businesses. And then even looking out a little bit further, fiscal years 16 and 17, it looks like we have 18 leases expiring between those 2 years. So it's going to get busy here in 16 and 17, so I hope you're ready. And that concludes my report for this evening.
Very good. Thank you. Any questions? All right. Much appreciated. Thank you, Brian. Mr. Triberg?
Good evening, Chair Spicer and Commissioners. A key performance objective for the Facilities Division is the completion of our minor capital improvement projects. These differ from our main capital improvement projects, which will be brought before you, I believe, in October or November this year, which is a 6-year capital improvement program. The minor CIPs are typically less than $100,000, but still have a similarly long lifespan of 10 to 20 years or longer. Every year we identify these projects on the order of 25 to 30. Last year was no different. We had identified 26 of these projects. We completed 22 of them for a completion of 85%, and our performance objective is 80%. It's been a pretty tough objective to meet over the years. We didn't make it for 3 years in a row. In the last 2 years we've made it, so we're kind of pleased that we're keeping up with these projects. These projects really demonstrate the variety of work we do and the many trade skills our staff has. And I'm going to talk a little bit about a few of these projects coming up this evening, handrails, lights, and some storm repairs. I think a lot of people saw a YouTube video of a window getting smashed in by a giant wave at Moby Dick's restaurant this year. Well, it not only smashed in the window, it also destroyed the catwalk along the west side of the restaurant itself. And so staff went in immediately after, repaired the whole thing, constructed it in a manner that waves should not be able to break it apart into the future. This part of the wharf really takes a beating when we get a large swell. A couple of years ago, we had a large swell, and it broke the sewer line and a few other things. So we're trying to beef up this area to the extent that we can. That was a structural upgrade related to a storm. We do aesthetic upgrades. This is a little bit of a fuzzy picture, but these are rope lights installed around our multi-tenant buildings and commercial buildings on Stearns Wharf. We used to have lights that are little incandescent bulbs we call Dane lights, and we had them for years and years, and they would all burn out, and they were kind of difficult to maintain. And we didn't have anything for quite a while, and tenants really, really liked them and really wanted to get them back. But now with the LED rope lights, they're inexpensive, they're very, very versatile. So we bid this out and put these up this year, and it's really nice when the days get a little shorter, and it really improves the aesthetics out there, and merchants really seem to like it. Sort of a common theme over at the harbor this year was handrail repairs we did and installation. We'd spent over $100,000 on handrails this year. I think people sort of take for granted that they're out there to protect us, and we actually have probably on the order of miles of them between the harbor and Stearns Wharf. One location, this is Marina 1, the Harbor West restroom. This area in particular exposes a lot of utilities. We've had a couple people fall in there, believe it or not. So we decided to put a handrail up, and this was constructed out of recycled plastic by our waterfront facility staff. Very durable and excellent material to use at the waterfront. This is the sea landing handrail. I showed you this earlier as part of a different project. This is ipe wood, which is a hardwood, a tropical hardwood that's they can regrow it in different forests. And it's another material that works great with stainless steel cables, and you can see through it, so you can really get really preserves the views around the harbor. And this is really nice. We've got a lot of people that go through this area, especially with the cruise ships. There's over 100,000 people that pass through this area every year now. The city pier, sometimes we just replace them in kind. We take the old wood that's rotten and we've been replacing everything with recycled plastic. It's very durable, lasts forever, and looks just like the old one. Another major one we did was out on the Rock Groin. This is over 400 feet long and was completely deteriorated and didn't meet code requirements. So we redesigned the whole thing. This is made out of a cementatious product that, once again, is very durable in the marine environment. This one cost about $40,000. We just finished it just right before the 4th of July. So it looks pretty good. And it used to have some fluorescent lights in it to provide a little bit of lighting out there, but we installed some rote lights under the bottom. So if you go out there at night, it's kind of neat. It's a nice little ambiance out there. As I mentioned, we identified 26 projects this year and completed 22. This year we spent about a little over $300,000 on our minor capital improvement projects. Most of them come out of our facilities operating budget, but some of them also come out of our capital fund, our harbor preservation fund. This performance objective is probably the best measure of our productivity and our staff's ability, and we're going to continue to move forward. We've probably got another 25 or 30 identified, and we've already started on a few for this year. So this concludes my presentation this evening. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions for Mr. Treiber? Apparently not. Carl, thank you. I do greatly appreciate the visuals you use for your presentations. Thank you. Mr. Cronman, Harbor Operations Report.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. Well, as it's late August and we're peering towards fall, I thought it would be a good time to recap some of our racing and regatta events this summer. We had two very close together, beginning with the FAR 40 the Santa Barbara leg of the West Coast Championships of the FAR 40s. This is a slide of those vessels. They are absolutely beautiful, high-tech, sleek, very, very advanced sailing vessels. And on July 16th, we hosted the Santa Barbara leg of their West Coast Championships. And it took place in 6 to 15 knot winds at the most, which made for very, very close quarter racing. And for those who follow this kind of thing, it resulted in like a 1-point victory. This is really, really tough elite sailing. And there were boats from Mexico, Australia, the United States, and Italy competing in this. And it was won by, and I'm going to go right to my staff report so I don't mess this up, the skipper Alberto Rossi steered his Italian entry, the Enfant Terrible, to that one-point victory over a Chicago boat, the Flash Gordon 6. So you can imagine they're probably zooming around the Great Lakes on one of these as we speak. 3 Santa Barbara boats participated in the event, and John DeMarcos aboard the Gruvaderci placed 6th, which is a very, very respectable result amid such a competitive world-class fleet. And we've begun very, very tentative, emphasis on tentative discussions with the Yacht Club about the potential for hosting the FAR 40 Worlds here next year. It's way out there on the horizon. It'll take a lot of technical and logistical work to possibly be able to make that happen. So cross your fingers, and maybe we'll be talking about that between now and then. That would be extremely exciting and good for the community. But like I say, discussions are extremely preliminary at this point. Then on July 25th, a short time later, in like 10 days, 93 sailboats took off from Santa Barbara on the 42nd annual King Harbor race. That's an 81-mile race that goes from Santa Barbara to King Harbor in Redondo. And the numbers were up from last year, probably due to a couple of factors. Number one, the economy has improved and more boats more folks are willing to spend the discretionary time and money to participate in races like this. But also, Transpac, I believe, goes every other year. I think there are more boats participating in this race this year than last year because they were involved in the Trans-Pacific race. The Yacht Club and the Santa Barbara Sailing Club fielded 6 teams and took home several awards. 2 Santa Barbara boats won first in class, including the Tranquility, skipper Max Lynn. This is the interesting about Max. This is the 41st time out of 42 years he's participated in the King Harbor race. He missed it the first year. There are various versions of why he missed it. He was new to the Yacht Club. He didn't have a boat. He was between boats, but he hasn't missed a year in the last 41 years. So we'd like to kind of give a shout out to Max and urge him to keep the streak going because that's really an amazing commitment to a wonderful race. The Flying Dutchman, in the Crazy 88, skipper Dr. Laura's boat won a first in class too. And the overall best corrected time was the Flying Dutchman, a Hobie 33 from King Harbor Yacht Club, which turned in the fastest time of 11 hours and 31 minutes. So for complete race results, of course, you can go to the Yacht Club website and go to their race page and get all of that. But a very, very successful moderate wins from the start line all the way through the race, which didn't make for the fastest world-breaking times, but it meant for a very good competitive race in which possibly all competitors finished, but if not all, very close to it. And then on July 26th, the day after the King Harbor race, Santa Barbara hosted the state sprint championships, outrigger sprint championships. This attracted outrigger canoes from San Francisco to San Diego, and it's a wonderful spectator sport because it's all very near shore. And it's been hosted for the past 30 years by the Santa Barbara Outrigger Canoe Club. And it's divided into a multitude of age categories, size categories, OC1s, OC3s, 4s, and 6s. And so there was plenty of opportunity for folks to compete in this exciting event. And what I found very, very interesting in these races that go from 1,000 to 3,000 meters, they're all preceded by some cultural events, an homage to their Hawaiian heritage, including Hawaiian canoe blessings, singing, and hula dancing. And I've been working with the outrigger clubs on some possible changes to the West Beach permitting system program, and I came to find out that the canoes are always pointed toward the ocean. I'm learning a lot and they're also going to drag me out on a canoe, and I haven't been on one before, so I'm looking forward to paddling an outrigger canoe. But overall, that was another terrifically successful event, and notable results for Santa Barbara racers included novice men who placed second, masters who placed third, open men's A who placed second. I told you there were a lot of groups. and Open Women's A, who placed fourth. So we'd like to send our heartiest congratulations, and I know you join us, to everybody who participated, and an extra congratulations to our Santa Barbara competitors. And finally this evening, even though I mentioned that, I apologize. Thank you, Carl. I have a few slides of the outrigger races that we'll get back to here in a second. Were you running through those while I was talking? I didn't even know. This is what it looks like. This is a 6-man outrigger canoe, and there they are launching with folks in the water helping them, and there are a bunch of kids groups and adults groups in different sizes. So it was, and I want to thank the Santa Barbara Outrigger Club for passing these photos along to me so I could share them with you and the public this evening. And finally, on the safety, water safety front, even though we talk about summer heading into fall, really Santa Barbara boating season is going to be with us for several more months. And as a respectful reminder, we've received some comments, complaints, concerns about the number of kayaks and stand-up paddle boards in the harbor. They're crowding everybody out. They're taking over, et cetera, et cetera. What are you going to do about them? And so I wanted to take this opportunity to address some of those items and issues and concerns. The first thing for us all to know is that kayaks and stand-up paddleboards are vessels like any other, and they need to observe the rules and regulations governing vessel traffic in inland waters in the harbor, but they also have all the rights and privileges of any other vessel in the harbor. So it does get to be a crowded house in the harbor on warm summer days, but respect for these individuals and their vessels needs to be as mutual it is as they should have for other vessels, motor vessels, bigger sail vessels, and what have you. So as a reminder, we have 3 kayak SUP vendors in the harbor, the Channel Islands Outfitters, a.k.a. Paddle Sports, and Santa Barbara Sailing Center and Sea Landing. And all 3 do a good job of educating their clients about the rules of the road and safety considerations. I apologize for the busyness of this map, but this map reflects what's in a brochure that we've passed out and repassed out to all these vendors, and they do a pretty good job of educating their clients, even though their clients, once they're out of the chute, it's kind of hard to herd them in when they decide to do what they're going to do. But the dark yellow line is really the route they want to, the area they want to stay out of. In fact, it's labeled danger zone. What you want to pay attention to if you're a stand-up paddler or a kayaker especially is that small yellow line which typically runs around the perimeter of the harbor, starting on the backsides of Marinas 2, 3, and 4 and winding its way around the backside of Marina 1 and out around the sand spit. And, of course, once you get out to the sand spit, you've got to be wary that now you're heading out into open ocean, and you have to be wary of any swell that might be breaking and surfers that might be active in that red striped line on the sand spit. We've also made an attempt to reach out to non-waterfront-based businesses that have guided kayak tours and what have you, like Captain Jack's Captain Jack's Rentals and Santa Barbara Adventure Company. They have been enabled with the same literature that we've enabled our local vendors with. And then, of course, you have private kayaks and SUP folks who come down over whom we have little influence. I can't even say we have control over the others. All we can try to is influence them and educate them and get things moving in the right direction. So I'd like to finish up with a brief summary of safe kayaking tips for Santa Barbara Harbor. 1, familiarize yourself with the maritime rules of the road and California boating law. You are a vessel, and you're duty-bound to understand those rules and regulations just like anybody else. Obviously, as I showed on the map, it's a good idea to avoid high-traffic areas of the harbor and avoid crossing in front of oncoming traffic. SUPs and kayaks are a lot more maneuverable than large vessels, especially like big fishing trawlers coming in the afternoon. And so it's advisable for those highly maneuverable smaller craft, if they're going in one direction, keep going in that direction and send basically a message to the bigger boats that you're not going to tack right in front of them when they're on their way into the city pier to unload or headed to their slips. Wear a PFD, a life jacket, a personal flotation device. that's required to be on kayaks and it's required to be on SUPs. Most SUP operators, stand-up paddleboard operators, like the Class 5 PFD, the fanny pack one. That's the safest for them because quite frankly, if you fell off your board and the board was awash and your life jacket floated away from the board, better idea probably to be wearing a Class 5. So if you weren't great at swimming, you could pull the cord and inflate right there. That's most of the folks we see have them. Though we do see folks that have the other PFDs, the Class 3 ones, I believe, on the front of their boards. Keep a whistle on your PFD. It's louder than your voice. You know, if you're on your PFD and you fall, if you're on your board or in your kayak, and we do see a lot of overturned kayaks that kind of get beyond their comfort zone in the summertime, having that whistle is a great signaling device for folks. They tend to hear that better than they see you. Avoid rafting up or lingering in the main channel. In other words, tying kayaks together tends to present a problem, especially if you're floating around in the middle of the channel. And as well, avoid zigzagging or floating near boat traffic. In other words, if you're out to kayak, if you're out to use your paddleboard, use it in a sane and sensible manner, not a manner that I know it's fun. We're all out there for ocean recreation, but we're also in an area where you can get hurt, and you can actually cause other vessels to veer and hurt other people and cause sort of chain reactions. When you're crossing the channel, do so at the nearest point, in other words, the nearest right angle. If you have to cross the main navigation channel, please don't cross it diagonally. That's a longer crossing, and it takes longer and leaves you in harm's way and confuses other boaters for a longer period of time. Zip across as fast as you can. Well, not as fast as you can, maybe, but, at a good clip, at a right angle to the harbor so you get it done safely and quickly. Avoid the dredge and all dredging equipment. This is industrial equipment. It's it can at times and will before too long, in a few months, be operating under high electrical power, so you should always stay clear of the dredge. This is industrial equipment. Nobody should be paddling around or kayaking around. And when it's feasible, travel in a group. Now, this sounds counterintuitive to what I said about don't raft up or cluster up, but what it really means is that there are 3 or 4 of you. If you travel in a group rather than spreading out in a large area, it tends to make it more discernible as to what you're doing as a group. You tend to act together, so it sends a message to other vessels as to what your intentions and actions and activities on the water are. Avoid fishing lines near Stearns Wharf. We've had folks in kayaks get hung up in fishing lines, and the fishermen don't like it, and sometimes they start pulling, and the kayaks don't like it because they get all wrapped up. They can actually be tipped over in fishing lines, so it's a good idea to stay away from the area we know as Plank Park out on the end of Stearns Wharf for folks who are casting fishing lines. Also along the east side of the wharf, it's a good idea to avoid the passenger loading ramp because that's an area of high vessel activity. Captain Fred's boat, the Azure Seas, comes in there on a regular basis, as does the Little Toot. And so it's a good idea to stay far away from that part of the east side of Stearns Wharf. Check the weather forecast. Wind and slop and chop don't mix with kayaking. Most of the folks we pick up in the summer have gotten out beyond what I call their comfort zone, and they end up, capsizing. And quite frankly, a lot of them are visitors to our community, and a lot of them can't swim. But thankfully, most of the ones we've rescued this summer have had PFDs, and they know to get help, and they've done their best. Knock on wood, we didn't have any serious injuries to any of them this summer. But it's a good idea also to check the weather forecast, NOAA Weather Radio. You can go online if you're going kayaking or paddleboarding, and you can find out exactly what the wind and wave conditions are. If you have any questions, feel free to call Harbor Patrol at 564-5530, and we will tell you the latest NOAA Weather Radio forecast. And that's about it. I appreciate you indulging these safety tips, and I'm sorry to leave with such a didactic lesson on safety on the water, but at the same time, it's a very, very important topic, and fall's as beautiful as summer around here, and so I figured this was as good a time as any to advance these ideas. And with that, I conclude my report. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Cronman. Any questions? Bill? Go ahead. Commissioner Webb?
Thank you for your report, Mick. I hope that it helps with the congestion. And I've always had a question about the hierarchy of sailboats and the kayaks. And is there any who has more right-of-way than anyone else? Or
Madam Chair, Commissioner Webb, the right-of-way issues are fair. The right-of-way issues are all captured in the rules of the road, and they apply pretty much across the board relative to. There are some specific ones relative to highly maneuverable versus highly unmaneuverable vessels. My suggestion, respectfully, before I advance anything that could be interpreted one way or another, or, goodness forbid, be wrong, which does tend to happen more times than not. Again, I would recommend folks get a copy of the ABCs of California boating law. The Department of Boating and Waterways publishes this, and we have copies in the foyer of our office. And so a good read of this, I think, would be the smartest way to understand what your rights are, what's expected of you on the water, because you'll find things in the rules of the road like it's as incumbent upon the vessel that does not have the right-of-way to observe the rules of the road. Excuse me, let me phrase that. It's as incumbent upon the vessel that has the right-of-way. I'm going to go back. It's incumbent upon the vessel that does not have the right-of-way to properly yield as it is upon the vessel that has the right-of-way to maintain the right-of-way. In other words, they have an equal responsibility. So just saying I have the right-of-way is only half the equation. All those laws are written so that they are they point at each other so everybody knows their individual responsibility. If that makes sense. A lot of those are buried in here, so if I get started down a road here, I might fumble, and I don't want to do that. But the best thing to do is to look up the rules of the road yourself.
thank you. Yeah, it's hard to tell port and starboard on a kayak. So.
Commissioner Power.
Yes. The FAR 440 event generated a tremendous amount of good publicity and buzz among the boating community that's in the harbor, especially the sailors, obviously. And I imagine there were logistics to deal with that didn't surface for the average member of the public who enjoyed watching it. But I did notice that you managed somehow to cluster the teams together in different parts of the harbor. And we witnessed a lot of very cautious camaraderie, I guess I would say. But it was a lot of fun to see these people from all over the world interacting and talking about their boats and so forth, and then getting out on the water and really duking it out. So I don't know what the likelihood is of us being able to bring the Western Nationals back, or whatever it was called, or even the Worlds, but it was, I think, a great event for Santa Barbara to host, and I think you're to be commended for the management that you did with it.
I second.
Very good.
Great job. Thanks.
Any other questions? Mr. Croman, thank you very much, and I do appreciate your focus on safety. It's never takes a second place. It's always first and foremost. So I appreciate you bringing it up. With that, we move on to new business, and we have a recommendation.
Item 7, presentation from Channel Islands National Marine Sanctuary on a vessel speed reduction incentive trial for the Santa Barbara Channel. Recommendation that Harbor Commission receive a presentation from the Channel Islands National Marine Sanctuary on a vessel speed reduction incentive trial for the Santa Barbara Channel.
Great.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, Sean Hastings is here from the sanctuary to give a presentation to you on a new trial incentive program to slow ships down in the Santa Barbara Channel and reduce air pollution, and also increase protection of endangered whales. And you might recall within the last year or so we had a similar presentation, and so this is a kind of a follow-up to that and an update on what's going on. So with that, I'll turn it over to Sean.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Commissioners, for allowing us the opportunity to update you on a very exciting program that just launched. And Accompanying me tonight are my colleagues, Christy Burney with the Environmental Defense Center and Brian Schaffritz with the Santa Barbara County Air Pollution Control District. I believe it was about a year ago we were before the Commission sharing with you at that time, which was a program that was only in concept phase. And I have just a handful of slides tonight that I'll go through, and then I think we'll save the bulk of the time for any discussion, questions, or interest that you may have in this rather innovative program. So the reason we're here to talk about this is because Santa Barbara Channel and the Channel Islands National Marine Sanctuary, a federally designated marine protected area, is an area that is renowned for its visits by blue whales. Not only blue whales, but a lot of the great whales that visit the western coast, humpbacks, fin whales, etc. And since 2007, we've had a great concern over the impact of ship strikes on these endangered whales. They are listed under the Endangered Species Act and protected by other federal laws. And it's not a problem that just started in 2007, but it's when we became aware of it. And so working with the Sanctuary Advisory Council, we have been trying to reduce the risk of vessel strikes on these whales. And as we all can appreciate, not only are these whales important in and of themselves, but they're a great draw of tourism to this community and the whale watch fleet in our area, and a very important part of the Channel Island ecosystem. And at that time, our advisory council delved into the issue, learning about how vessel strikes have been reduced or mitigated in other parts of the world. One of the ideas that came out of our investigative work was to slow ships down reduces the likelihood that if a whale is hit, it'll die. And how do you slow a ship down? Was the challenge ahead of us. And one of the programs we looked at was at the ports of LA and Long Beach, where they actually slow ships down as they enter the ports to reduce the impact of air emissions in the LA air basin. And the way they get the ships to slow down is by incentivizing them to do so. They offer a financial mechanism, and they have a very high success rate. So this idea was, we researched it, we got interested in it, and we realized, how would we possibly offer financial incentives to major global shipping lines to pull this off? So the idea sat dormant for until this year. You can go to the next slide, please. So what we have launched here, and this is a consortium of partners, is we finally found that mechanism to offer an incentive to these ships. And that was through the Santa Barbara Foundation Innovation Grant. And working together, we approached the Santa Barbara Foundation. Let me take a half step back. Slowing ships down, as I mentioned, is good for whales. It's also good for air quality. So we approached our partners at the Santa Barbara Air Pollution Control District and said, why don't we work together on this and see how we could approach incentivizing slowing ships down. When we talked to you last time, we were thinking really big. We were approaching the California Cap and Trade Auction Program, which generates close to $500 million a year in the trading of carbon credits. And we thought that would be a great revenue source to offer to get incentive funds in order to slow ships down. That program has taken lots of turns and twists, and a lot of that money right now that is generated through cap and trade is being directed toward, and my colleagues here can correct me, but my understanding is a lot of it's being earmarked and directed toward the high-speed rail project that's envisioned to connect Los Angeles and to our northern cities. So that funding was not necessarily on the table. We approached the Santa Barbara Foundation. They thought this is a very innovative idea and concept, and they gave us $20,000 of seed money. So we developed a program. Here are the details of it. There's a lot of rationale behind each of the criteria. Slowing ships down to 12 knots. It matches the same speed that the ports currently slow the ships down to as they approach the ports. So we wanted to keep the notion of 12 knots in the captain's mind as they enter the Santa Barbara Channel all the way to the ports, and when they leave the ports and come through the channel. We required in the enrollment phase that the ships must already be participating in the ports programs that I have mentioned. Again, for consistency's sake, and to emulate a very successful program, most importantly, to not compete with it. We wanted these ships that have already shown a willingness to slow down and work with the ports in a non-regulatory way to reduce air emissions in the LA Air Basin, extend those benefits, extend that program to our community. The $20,000 is not a lot of money. So we realize that this is very much a trial idea. This is a proof of concept. So we only had enough money to incentivize about 16 ships. We chose the time frame, July to October, through October, because that's when the whales are here. That's also when we have the, how to say it, Brian?
The worst possible air quality.
Worst possible air quality is summer months. It is helpful that the air quality issue and the whale seasonality overlap. We're not looking to impact the maritime commerce through this region year-round if we can do it on a seasonal basis. Now, what was rather surprising to us, maybe we set our sights too low, we had an overwhelming response. We had, as you can see here, 6 global shipping lines. There's actually 7, but 6 of them came forward, enrolling their ships, verifying. We verified that they satisfied all the criteria above, and as I mentioned, we had enough funding for 16 transits. The money that was provided by the Santa Barbara Foundation was also matched by the Air Pollution Control District. The board and the staff there, represented here by Brian, they matched the funding so that we were able to offer 16 incentivized transits. We had over 80 different ships, transits, enrolled come forward and seek enrollment in our program. 6 global shipping lines mentioned here: COSCO, Hapag-Lloyd, K-Line, Maersk Line, Matson, and United Arab Shipping Company. Now, the incentive amount and the dollars are actually only part of the program. By me mentioning these ships by name and these companies by name, we really want to acknowledge the willingness of industry to work with us to solve these issues. That's the other part of the incentive program, is to collaborate to address ship strikes and air quality issues in a non-regulatory fashion, again, on a trial basis. Next slide, please. Here's the zone. If you start on the right of the slide, you can see Point Furman, which is the point right outside the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach. That first light blue zone is 20 miles from the port. That is the first tier of the port's program, and that's where they, again, have over 90% compliance. The shaded fuchsia area there is an extension of their program, another 20 miles, and they are looking to expand their program to 40 miles out, and that's currently underway. From that point, past Point Conception, is the Santa Barbara Vessel Speed Reduction Trial Zone. That's the zone we created. That's the zone that we've already had 10 transits come through, and they're meeting the criteria, and they're slowing down. So we're very excited about that. The broader goals here I've shared with you is obviously to protect whales and reduce air emissions. You're not going to necessarily achieve those goals with a trial. It's a proof of concept, although thankfully you can actually gauge and measure, and Brian can cover this in detail, the amount of, or the reduction in air emissions per ship. So there's a metric there. The conservation of whales is a broader goal, a little harder to measure, but of course we believe it will help toward that. Another specific goal of the program was to determine industry's willingness to work with us, and that goal's already been achieved overwhelmingly. We have offered 16 transits. We've incentivized 16 transits. There's another 20 on the table that are completely eligible, and we're still in fundraising mode to try and meet that demand for that. this trial gives us the opportunity to refine our data collection and our tracking mechanisms, where we verify that they have slowed down by using data streaming in from the transponders on each ship. It's part of the automatic identification system. And we receive that data, and working with Brian's office and our office, we can determine, did the ship actually slow down to 12 knots or less and maintain that speed going through. And I think what's particularly exciting is we're laying the foundation for a broader program. We hope that we do get the attention of the state. We do get the attention of other communities. We have the attention of industry, and we're working together. And we really think we can take this proof of concept and build on it in the near future. I'd like to invite you all to a forum on this. I've given you just a surface level understanding of what we're doing. We are meeting in our community on September 10th, the Carrillo Pavilion Arts Center from 3 to 5. We're going to have a panel of people representing the industry, NOAA, Air Pollution Control District, whale scientists, and elected officials have been invited. And we're going to delve into this and make sure that everyone in our community understands that what we're trying to do here is protect blue whales and protect blue skies at the same time. With that, I would like to offer the floor to my colleagues if they have anything to add, and we can get into any questions you may have.
Thanks, Sean, and appreciate the opportunity there it is, to be here tonight. And I think Sean did a great job. It's just a really exciting program. We feel really privileged to be involved and working with these partners, and happy to answer any questions you guys have. I don't know if Brian wants to add anything.
I just want to say I'm working here with great partners, and I presented at my board meeting today at the Air Pollution District, and it was very well received by our board. And my personal perspective is that the meetings here are much more exciting than my board meetings. So thanks.
Wow.
Thanks for that. And I'm willing to answer any questions. And this is really just to emphasize for the air quality side. There's right now about 2,500 transits per year going through the channel. Each one of those ships puts out about 1 ton to 2 tons, depending on their size and their speed, of nitrogen oxides, which is a precursor to ozone, which is part of smog. And so if we can slow each one of those ships down, if we get a bigger program going and we're able to get the funding Sean talks about, we're talking about a big reduction in air pollution. So that's our interest with the program.
Thank you. I have many questions, but I'll start with Commissioner Kramer.
You've answered basically most of my questions I had when I read this. I was wondering about the monitoring and enforcement of it, but there are apparently transponders on the ships, and those are monitored where?
Yeah, that's correct. Each ship, much like each airline flying overhead, they have a transponder. It emits a very simple radio signal, and the sanctuary has a radio tower on the top of Santa Cruz Island right next to the Navy site, and we receive the radio signal, transmit it back to the university where our new offices are. The University of California also has a radio tower up there receiving this information, and then we begin the processing. It's an incredible volume of data because the ships transmit information every 6 seconds. It's incredibly accurate, and again, between Brian's shop and our shop, we've learned and trained ourselves to take this fire hose of information and distill it down to be able to determine that they are actually complying with I should say cooperating. Complying, in my mind, connotates a regulatory program. They are cooperating with our voluntary program.
And I should have said, first of all, I think it's a fantastically exciting program. I mean, it's really great that you've done this. So if they didn't cooperate with it, if they were exceeding, if they were going whatever, what then?
So what happens then is we are in good communication with each shipping line, and we'd like to understand why. There are many factors that affect global shipping, especially their schedules. And so in the spirit of this trial, we want to learn from it. And so in the event that a ship is unable to if it enrolls and we verify it satisfies their criteria, and then they're unable to slow down, they would not receive their incentive, and we would in turn offer that transit to another ship. We have more demand than we have funding, which is a great problem. But we want to understand why they weren't able to slow down. And one thing that we have asked them, because we don't want to push the problem north. In good conscience, I can't push a ship that slows down here and tries to make up the time by speeding up when it leaves our region. It's going to be transiting through the Monterey Bay, Corriedale Bank, and Gulf of the Farallon National Marine Sanctuaries, where our whales visit as well. And so, in good conscience, we don't want them speeding up. We don't have any control over that. And so we're going to be analyzing how many ships did speed up to maintain whatever schedule they felt they needed to keep, and how many were able to absorb the slowdown in their schedule. This is a great opportunity to learn from this program as we envision expanding it in the future.
Thank you.
If they don't meet the speed, they don't get the incentive payment.
Okay. And one last question. I noticed it ended the end of October when the gray whale migration is also beginning, is it not? Are the gray whales not a problem with the ships?
Gray whales are hit by ships. And what we're doing here, and is often it's sort of a tenet of wildlife conservation, it's sort of a triage approach. I'm focused on the whales that are currently listed under the Endangered Species Act. Gray whales are protected by the Marine Mammal Protection Act, but they thankfully came off the endangered species list not too long ago. We, of course, are concerned about every whale and every species, but we are focused on those that are critically close to extinction.
Thank you, and great program. Thank you for doing this.
Thank you.
Very good. Any questions? Commissioner Banthelen.
First, thank you all for being here and being a part of the program. Also wanted to single out Maersk. I'm pretty sure they're the world leader in sustainability in the shipping community, and I think they were probably first in the door to talk to you. And I think that's a big part of it. I mean, you mentioned that it's incentive-based and not regulatory, and I think that's a great approach. Unfortunately, I don't see cap and trade. I mean, everybody wants that money, but hopefully you can get a small little piece of that. Curious, and I should have been paying a little bit more attention to the meeting today, but as far as funding goes, $20,000 from each, it's a good start. Have you approached county or city on a general fund basis during their budgets, or plan to on the next budget go around?
This is where the Fed hands it over to the county representative.
I'm going to have Christy speak to funding here. Yeah, she could tell you we've made the rounds in a lot of different ways here. So
yeah, we've been reaching out to everybody, and specifically since the seed funding really came from a foundation, a local foundation, which will support kind of even a broader project, which will involve a working group. So in addition, we'll take the lessons learned from this and bring it to a working group, which will involve industry, agencies, nonprofits. So we really have just been hitting the ground hard, but I think there's been success here, and so we're reaching out to other partners, and we're definitely following some avenues and hoping the next month or so to be able to follow up with some more information about that.
Brian's being humble. The Air Pollution Control District not only matched the funding, but given the high demand, they went back to the board and asked for additional funding, which I'm not sure if you can speak to the status of it.
Yeah, so we have, right now we have enough for 5 additional transits. We've been coordinating with the Ventura Air Quality District because they're right in that corridor there, and so they would see benefits. And they've informed us they're going to contribute some funding. They got to go before the board to get the final buy-off on that. So with the seed money, our contributions, and the potential from Ventura, we think we can fund 32 roughly transits, and we're still looking at some other possible mechanisms. About a year ago, we did a lot of discussion of this concept with the counties and the cities.
Sir, if we could get you to use the microphone, it helps with the recording of the presentation and the...
Oh, I apologize for that.
I didn't realize it.
Okay.
We got lots of
we
microphones.
need a third chair.
Well, I'm almost done what I had to say, but I'll say it in the mic. And we did all our partners, us three mostly, went around to almost every commission. We went to the Coastal Commission, we went to the City of Santa Barbara, county, other, so we shopped this whole concept around. We weren't making a direct ask for funding at that time, but they're well aware of the program. Yeah.
All right, thanks for that. And now that it's going, I mean, during next budget cycle, June would probably be a good time to go in and make an ask. And are there plans to go up? My colleague did a quick calculation of $6.25 million for all of the trips. Is there a plan eventually, given the data, everything looks good, to bump it up and do all 2,500?
Well, I think that would be tremendous. We don't want to. Mick pointed this out to me when he first became aware of what we viewed as a success, and he pointed out, well, it's less than 1% of all the ships going through, and we realize that. Again, it's a proof of concept, it's a trial. We want to work with industry to look at a variety of ways of either slowing the ships down or rerouting ships around whale concentrations. Thus the working group that Christy mentioned, a planning process under the auspices of the Sanctuary Advisory Council. That's going to kick off this fall, and we're going to spend over a year talking in great detail about this, and we're going to have that number in front of us. If we were to go programmatic on this, then we're looking at $6 million plus a year. That's just for the channel. Now, the $2,500, that we didn't make that number up. That's the average incentive amount offered to the ships when they enter the ports. Now, I think what surprised us and what we really are heartened by the industry's interest is that they're slowing down for $2,500 for 20 miles as they enter the port. We expanded the program 120 more miles for the same amount of money. So, again, I really don't think it's about the amount of money. It's more so that we are trying to collaborate in a non-regulatory approach, and the industry deserves recognition for doing so. And we're trying to give that tonight here. The recent press that came out a couple weeks ago went national on NPR and all the local newspapers and other print and radio. So, and we're purposely naming these companies so that they get the recognition they deserve for working with us.
One last question, and I appreciate you almost went there. I'm going to let you kind of finish it off. So we have the channel, and then there's a lot of different rules. If you go so far out, you can burn a different type of fuel. The Navy wants you to do different things. Can you speak to kind of how that's changing and getting better or worse with traffic in the channel or going around? And I know you could probably talk for a while on that, but you can go as far in depth as you'd like.
So in summary, as Brian mentioned, there's approximately 2,500 vessel transits in the region here. There's an equal amount still transiting outside the islands. The working group process that we've alluded to includes the Navy coming to the table with us. They've already agreed to, the U.S. Coast Guard, shipping industry, to look at shipping in the region more globally than just in the channel and just whales, because we realize we want organized, vibrant maritime commerce in this region. We want it in a sustainable way that takes whales and air quality into account. This is a start.
Just want to finish by thanking you again for being here. It's an industry that does have a lot of issues associated with it. Obviously, it brings a lot of benefits as well, but it's one that we really can't regulate, and so it's kind of a nice approach you're taking, because we really couldn't do much if we wanted to on the other side. So thank you again.
Commissioner Power.
I'd like to add my thanks, too, for your report and your work. It's good to have you here this evening. A couple of questions. Has there been any research to suggest that reducing the speed of the ships from their normal speed by 6 to 2 knots makes a significant difference? I know you picked 12 knots as the maximum, so I was curious on is there research to back up that that's going to make a difference in terms of the whale strikes?
Yes, actually there is, and it's an analogy, and pardon it for being rather blunt, but it's if you're going to get hit by a bus, would you rather have going 50 miles an hour or 5 miles an hour? Well, first of all, you don't want to get hit by the bus. But slower speeds have shown that it greatly reduces the likelihood of a lethal strike. And the empirical research, peer-reviewed research that we have in our hands shows that at 10 knots, you can reduce the lethality, as we say, of a strike by 75%. And at 12 knots, it's around 50%. And interestingly, it is sort of a corresponding similar reduction in air pollution as you move, as you bring the speed down. Average speeds in the channel right now are about 14 to 18 knots. And so we were looking for a minimum of a 2-knot reduction in speed so that we would have the ability to measure some air quality benefit. And again, it's getting into that sweet spot of about the right speed for reducing impacts on whales, and again, is consistent with an existing program that the ships are familiar with.
Yeah, I think there's no question about the air pollution, but in all of the publicity I've seen on your good program, I didn't see anything that suggested that 12 knots really is a scientifically reliable number, I guess. So that was good information. Thank you.
And to be frank, it's hard to measure the number of whales actually hit or not hit.
I would imagine so.
And we believe that the whales, there's on average 1 to 3 whales a year that are hit off the coastline, and we believe it's an underestimate.
Yeah. Second question is, I noticed that APL, American President Lines, is not on your list, and yet my understanding is their home office is here in California. Have they been approached, or is there just not enough money?
Yes, they. I'm sorry. Yeah, yes, they have been. We broadcast the program far and wide. We have a great partner in the Pacific Merchant Shipping Association, which is an industry-based group that represents over 90% of the container traffic going into the ports of LA and Long Beach. They helped us broadcast the opportunity to participate, and in no way by not seeing a company up there does it illustrate their lack of interest. A lot of it relates to their extremely tight time frames, where between L.A. and the Port of Oakland, which is a majority of the traffic going along the coast is heading to or coming from, it's a 20-hour transit. And so slowing them down for 120 miles would add a couple, 3, maybe upwards of 4 hours to their transit. Some companies believe they could absorb that. Others at this time felt they could not. But in no way, APL has been at the table. They've been talking to us, and at this time didn't see it within their ability to absorb that additional time.
Good. I also know that company has a corporate foundation, and it may be that this is not the sort of thing that they would want to support, but I imagine many of the shipping companies do as well, or give to the association in that way. My final thought was in your interest in getting attention. It would seem unnatural that the Natural History Museum would be interested in having some information about the existence of whale strikes and your preventative program in their sea center. And I don't know whether there's been any thought of somehow sharing that information, letting the public that comes through there, and they get probably close to 100,000 visitors a year at that site, just seeing a little bit something about the good work you're doing and the issue that you're addressing.
So we are, Amanda, who is the director at the Sea Center, is on the Channel Islands Sanctuary Advisory Council, and so she's definitely aware of the program and been apprised, and we are keeping in touch with her. So that might be an opportunity we can explore as we roll this program out. And I will say, this is relatively new. We've basically sent out the press release within the last month. So you're getting to hear the good news first, and we hope there's more to come, and we can definitely work with her.
And I would just add that the amazing blue whale skeleton that greets visitors to the Natural History Museum up off Mission Street is actually, or was, a ship-struck whale.
All right. Any further questions? Corey?
I guess one more. Is that number total? I know you said it's probably underreported, but the 1 to 3, is that total whale strikes or specific?
That's an average
kind of
annual 1 to 3 whales per year. And my agency in charge with protecting these animals has to determine how many whales per year leaving the population due to human causes is too many to get the populations growing again. Our charge is to get these populations growing again. Blue whale populations are not growing at this time. It's of great concern to us, and we believe ship strikes is one of the primary causes of keeping that population suppressed. And at this time, 3 animals a year taken by ship strikes or other human causes is what we call the potential biological removal. That means that's the limit. And so we are right at that limit right now on average. And again, we believe it's an underestimate, which is why there's so much federal attention, and we're very heartened by the local attention. Whether it's protecting whales or protecting ourselves, there's one approach and one solution here, and that's slowing ships down.
Very good. And Commissioner Kramer.
Yeah. A question on that: how will you be able to monitor whether it's successful against the whales? And
it'd be very difficult to do quantitatively, and what we hope is we don't see ship-struck whales. And when you're working with ships, there's only 2 things you can really do. You can move the ships and separate them from whales, or you can slow the ships down. And we've already adjusted the shipping lanes away from whale concentrations, and as was pointed out, we are going to look at rerouting traffic south of the islands and trying to get it organized back there. It's a concept that the community's been interested in, and we want to work with the Navy to really flesh that out. The only other approach would be to slow them down. So it's pretty simple policy tools, but in a very dynamic and complicated world.
Thank you.
All right. Commissioner Webb.
Speaking of rerouting, you're talking about going around the backside of the islands. Does that significantly reduce whale strikes and air pollution?
I can speak to the whale strike issue. There are whales south of the islands as well. Actually, that's where we see concentrations of fin whales, also endangered and very prone to ship strike for some reason. And we have shipping south of the island. We've had shipping south of the island since 2009. So half the shipping is already back there. It's not organized. It's not in the traffic separation scheme that we have in the Santa Barbara Channel. And I think I suggested this at the last meeting, or the last time we discussed this. That's greater concern to me, is the unorganized shipping traffic back there. 2 ships colliding would be a much bigger problem than just whales. And so our interest is, if the ships are already back there, let's explore organizing them. And if there is a way to move the ships back into the channel where they are, then we need to do so in a whale-sensitive way.
Did you have an add-on? To follow up on the air side, within the channel, there's kind of this circulation, as we call it, an eddy. You guys probably know the term. Mm-hmm. So that can concentrate the emissions and bring them on shore, and with all the reactions that take place in the atmosphere, provide a riper situation for formation of smog. So if you move them out, that could reduce that, but then the problem could translate down to LA. So you got to look at the air all along the coast.
And the other thing I'll point out is greenhouse. So Brian's been talking about nitrogen oxide, smog-forming pollution. Greenhouse gas emissions, which are also global shipping, accounts for 5% of greenhouse gas emissions globally, and they're indiscriminate. Doesn't matter where they're emitted.
Good. The other commissioners have asked and all the questions I had as well. So thank you for coming back. I greatly appreciate it. I have personal great interest in the EDC and the Channel Islands National Marine Sanctuary. You're welcome back for these presentations whenever you feel appropriate. I enjoy it tremendously.
Thank you.
Okay. That takes us to our last item. Mr. Triberg, Water Conservation.
Thank you.
Recommendation.
Item 8, water conservation recommendation that Harbor Commission receive and review a report on water conservation efforts at the waterfront.
Thank you, Chair Spicer and Commissioners. Earlier this year, I presented to the Commission the results of a WaterWise survey conducted by our city's Water Resources Division back in May of 2013. Coincidentally, we didn't get any rain this last winter, and the City Council declared a Stage 1 drought on February 11th, 2014, and asking city staff and others to identify ways to reduce water usage, and recommended a 20% reduction in water usage. By the time May came around, there hadn't been any more rain, and they declared a Stage 2 drought, which kind of formalizes the recommendation into a requirement to reduce water usage by 20%. And they also adopted what were called extraordinary drought regulations, which I'll talk about in just a moment. The WaterWise survey that was prepared identified several water conservation measures that staff, for the most part, staff was able to implement throughout the waterfront. And those are things like adjusting flush valve toilets, installing automatic shutoff nozzles on dock hoses, which I'll talk about in a moment, lavatory aerators on the faucets, low-flow shower heads in all of our showers, repair leaking toilets, repair leaking shower heads and valves, and they were able to calculate what they thought our estimated savings would be, not only in cost but in water. Some of the folks may have noticed some of these all over the docks lately. The Water Resources Division generously gave us 1,200 automatic shutoff nozzles, which staff went and distributed throughout all the marinas. They distributed a total of 674, or 58% of all the marinas had dock hoses without shutoff nozzles on them. So that's quite a bit. These are still available. We have about 500 in stock still. So as they go missing or something happens to them, people are welcome to come up to the Harbor Patrol office, and we can continue to distribute these, as it's a very effective way of saving water. The best way to monitor our water conservation efforts to date is to kind of look at all our facilities in 3 different facility types: the marinas, the landscaping, and the public restrooms. But before we do that, it's important to know a little bit about how you can determine just how you're doing with your savings. Most water meters, the ones at your homes, have a base allotment that is, for the most part, calculated on the area of a facility, but sometimes on historical use as well. The unit of measure is 100 cubic feet. 100 cubic feet of water is 748 gallons, just to put all this kind of into context for you. The marinas are the largest users of water at Santa Barbara Harbor and all throughout the waterfront. Marina 1 is the largest with, I believe it's 249 HCF per month, which is quite a bit. Marina 2, Marina 4 is the second largest, and Marina 3. All combined, the marinas are 43%, 545 HCF, or 43% of all the water that's used at the waterfront. That's quite a bit. It's one of the larger users in the city itself. In the marinas, we implemented all of the water conservation measures recommended through the WaterWise program. Marina 1 has 2 restrooms with multiple showers. Marina 2 and 3 each have a single restroom with showers. Marina 4 doesn't have any showers, but it has a public restroom. It's the only marina restroom open to the public, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. Landscaping uses quite a bit of water throughout the waterfront. We have landscaping throughout all of our parking lots, some grassy areas. We also have really focus and emphasize the aesthetics of the area, especially the Harbor Commercial area, where we get a lot of visitation. And I've talked a little bit about the sea landing landscaping we recently did, all new plants to try and improve the aesthetics of that area. It was really kind of degraded over time. And I'll talk a little bit about the water conservation efforts in these areas as they vary a little bit. Public restrooms, we have 8 of them in the harbor. We also have 2 outdoor showers in those blue dots. These are open to the public 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and they get a tremendous amount of use, more than people would expect. We also have 3 public restrooms on the wharf, and then another public restroom over at the visitor center. And these get much more use than anybody would expect, especially with an increase in visitation lately. So in the conservation results to date, we implemented some of these measures in April, started giving out the automatic shutoff nozzles in June. So this is kind of recent, and we don't really have a lot of data yet, but we do have data up through the July billing. In general, the marinas are looking pretty good, with the exception of Marina 4. We've exceeded the 20% reduction. Marina 4 has a public restroom, and we think that one reason why we haven't met that to date is because of the increased use there. Landscaping is really pretty simple. A lot of the landscape irrigation controllers irrigate 4 days a week. You turn it down to 3 days a week, there's a 25% reduction. It's also kind of the low-hanging fruit of water conservation. You turn it down another day if you need to conserve more water. We do have some issues with landscaping related to some of the areas we really don't want areas to turn brown and plants to die. You certainly don't want them to die completely, because to go back and re-landscaping can be very, very expensive. We haven't turned the water down in the vicinity of the Breakwater Restaurant and the Waterfront Center, where we get the most vegetation. We haven't turned it down at all. We haven't turned the water down at Sea Landing yet. Those are all new plants. We want those to get established. All the other areas have been reduced about 25%. But like I said, there's more opportunity there for further reductions. Public restrooms is a little bit different. We use a lot of recycled water down at the harbor, and it's kind of commingled with the restrooms and with the irrigation. So it's a little bit hard sometimes to parse out what goes directly to the public restrooms and what goes to irrigation, because they're all on the same meter frequently. But public restrooms, some of the meters that are dedicated to public restrooms, like at the Visitor Center, out on the wharf, and Ledbetter Restroom, we haven't really seen much in the way of reductions out there, certainly not what we'd like to see. The most obvious reason why it has to do with the visitation we've had, and I'll talk about that a bit more in a moment. The best measure of our success to date is our marinas. The marinas use the most water. We feel like we could probably have the most influence over that. We have a lot of public outreach to our slip holders through dock lines, things like this, putting the signs on the gates. We put the automatic shutoff nozzles out there. And for the most part, what this is demonstrating is the dark line is the 20% reduction. And this is April, May, June, July. And we read the meters on August, so we think we're still in a pretty good direction with Marina 1, 2, and 3. Marina 4 has consistently, we haven't had the reduction that we've wanted to, so we've got to work on that a little bit more. But in general, thanks should go out to our slip holders. I think they seem to be getting the message and doing their best to do their share in reducing our water. And like I said, it's well over 40% of the total use, so the most we can reduce out there is going to really impact our water usage. We have several things that influence our water usage that we really have no control over. Any visiting vessel can come in and get water at any time. That's the nature of a port, especially a port of refuge. But when the USS Reagan comes in and gets water, it's a little bit different. They came in and they got about 104 HCF, which is a lot of water, which doubled the use for that month on that meter at the city pier. On our marinas, most of our water, potable and firewater lines, are underwater hung along the side of the dock. And it's not very easy to detect a leak. We had a leak at Cabrillo Landing, the Cuda dock, kind of by the Maritime Museum a while back. It went unnoticed for a day, didn't get shut off over the weekend, and it doubled the water usage on that meter in that month just with a couple days of having a leak. We try to inspect it with our dive team and staff on a regular basis, and anybody who looks over the side and sees bubbles coming out or water jetting out, please let us know right away, because that's a water leak, and this is not a good time to have those. We've also noticed a lot of an increase in visitation throughout the waterfront and the wharf, and a couple ways to kind of measure that is visiting boaters have gone up about 18%, recreational boaters. Parking revenues out on the wharf and everywhere have gone up, which is an indication of increased visitors. And restaurant sales are up on the average of about 10%, which is quite a bit. And that's over last year, which was up from the year before. And anybody who goes down and walks down the bike path or goes to the wharf, there are people everywhere. The weather's just been ideal all this summer, last winter, the summer before. And those folks are using our restrooms, especially our public restrooms. And so it's a little bit more of a challenge to go ahead and conserve water where you really don't have control over the people that are using these facilities. Nevertheless, we are going to apply some additional water conservation efforts. Like I said, the low-hanging fruit is to further reduce irrigation. We really need to meet this 20% reduction overall, so we've already met with parks. We've already turned down a few areas. Sea Landing, we're going to start reducing the irrigation there, and we're going to turn all the lawn areas down again. So I think that's going to help considerably. The public restrooms, we can do a couple things to the existing fixtures. There's valves you can adjust in toilets and in some of the urinals, and it makes a big difference how much water they use. And there's not a lot of signage out there. We do have placards in some of the restrooms and most of the restrooms, but it's not that obvious, so we're going to try and make it a little more obvious so when people come in, they see that Santa Barbara is really in dire straits right now with respect to water. And an important component of this is continue to monitor results. We really only have, July is really the first month where we can kind of tell how our water conservation efforts are impacting water usage. And like I said, irrigation and marinas seem to be working pretty good. Public restrooms, not so much. But we'll be getting August results soon, and we'll kind of adjust accordingly. There's additional water conservation measures to consider that are a little bit more drastic. Things like turning off public showers or even closing restrooms, which is a pretty drastic measure to take. Renovating restroom fixtures, especially in the public restrooms. Only one of them has waterless urinals. They don't have dual flush valves. They're a little bit older, and these are pretty costly to renovate these and upgrade these fixtures. We can do them when we do remodels and upgrades like we did at the 119 building, the Brophy Brothers restroom last year, and we will continue to do so as we move into the future. But to get that amount of water savings associated with those upgrades is fairly costly to us, so we'll kind of see where this whole drought issue goes before we start implementing those more aggressively. In summary, we're about at 15% overall reduction in water use, and that's as of the July billing, and we were kind of trending in that direction in the previous months. The marinas and landscaping are meeting the 20% reduction, and we really need to increase our water conservation efforts at the public restrooms. And as I mentioned before, we're going to continue with the monitoring and see what else we can do to work at that. We feel pretty comfortable we can get to the 20% reduction, and we really don't know what's going to happen beyond that. That concludes my presentation this evening, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Carl. Any questions? Commissioner Sloan.
Yeah, thank you, Carl. So if the marinas are the biggest use of water, have we looked at where that water is being used in the marina? You talked about the restrooms, but how about the rest of the water that's not being used in the restrooms? Do we know kind of a breakdown of how much is being used to wash boats or the different activities that you might use water for?
Chair Spicer, Commissioner Sloan, we really don't. It's, you can go out and take a look and see what people are doing. One of the recommendations was to install the automatic shutoff nozzles on all the hoses. So I think when the water resources folks came out, they said, well, here's a pretty obvious waste. So they actually spent the money and bought us all those nozzles. So I think that was a pretty obvious one. But it's really hard to determine how much is going towards people washing down their boats or filling up their water tanks or doing whatever. Some water associated with all sorts of activities out there. Restrooms really use quite a bit of water in general. So Marina One has 2 restrooms, and the other ones each have a restroom with the showers. So I think the majority of the use is associated with those facilities. So all we can really do is educate the slip holders and let them know that that they need to help us conserve to the best they possibly can.
Have you considered putting recycled water out to wash boats?
No, we haven't. I don't know that would be appropriate to pump because you'd be pumping it into the ocean, right? It'd be washing off the boats into the ocean, and it would be the infrastructure really isn't there. We do have a recycled water line down through the harbor main lot. So plumbing the restrooms is reasonable and feasible. And we do have a couple restrooms that don't have it yet. So we will be doing that with capital upgrades.
Yeah, okay. Just some thoughts. Thank you.
Any others? Thank you. Oh, sorry, Commissioner Webb.
Thank you for your report, Carl. Have you had an orientation with the professional boat washers and kind of talked with them about their procedures or maybe what their usage is?
Chair Spicer, Commissioner Webb, no, we haven't. We've written a couple articles in dock lines, but we may want to reach out to some of our BAP holders, and that's something I think we could do, and I think that's a very good idea.
Commissioner Bantholin.
Thank you, Carl, for the report. Question, do we have in the restrooms any pre-low flow toilets? I know when we looked at the county, I think we had some porcelain from the 80s, and I'm curious if everything is at least somewhat new or if we've got some real bad stuff that it might make sense to actually replace.
Chair Spicer, Commissioner Banland, it varies. You know, the restrooms we've remodeled are all current, modern, low-flow stuff. Every restroom has low-flow toilets in them and urinals. It's the waterless ones that really save a lot of money, and we don't have very many of those. And we don't have any of those. Well, in one of the public restrooms does, but the others do not. So that's another thing we really need to look at and incorporate into our capital upgrades. But we do have the low-flow toilets, and we do adjust them, and it has made quite a bit of difference. So keeping them working properly, because it's easy for them to get out of adjustment and not be low flow anymore. And that's one thing we found, and that's another thing. It was a recommendation from our water resources folks, so we're focused on that.
Thanks. And the next one is a little bit of a wild card. So if you can't answer this, that's all right. But water-wise, I think a lot of us have seen the placards at different restaurants and saying we only serve if you ask, but it doesn't seem to be mandatory, voluntary, and I don't know if you can speak to that at all. But a lot of people have been curious, myself included, how effective that program is, who participates, and all that.
Well, I'll answer what I know. The council adopted extraordinary drought regulations, and part of those regulations, one of which is you cannot use an open hose to wash your boat. You have to use an automatic shutoff nozzle for boats and cars. You cannot serve water at a restaurant unless it's asked for. So those are some of those regulations that have been adopted by City Council and perhaps at the county and other municipalities that are in a drought. So they did adopt the regulations as part of the Stage 2 drought, a declaration that was done back in May. So those are, and there is a schedule for violations. The first one's a warning. Second violation, I believe, is like a $100 fine or something like that. So it can have teeth if people don't cooperate, and I know they're looking to up enforcement as necessary.
Some undercover water drinkers, huh?
That's right.
Thank you, Carl.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Triberg. Unfortunately, I think this is going to be an issue that's going to be with us for a while, so I appreciate all your efforts. We are moving on to staff commission communications. Anything, Mr. Reedman?
Chair Spicer, nothing from staff this evening. Thanks.
Okay. I guess anything from the commission? The only thing I would add is to make sure that the tens of people watching at home and everybody here knows that next month's meeting is going to be pushed back 1 week. And you mentioned that earlier, so I'll just reiterate that. With that, I take a motion to adjourn. And
I'll make that motion.
And look for a second.
Second.
We're adjourned. Thank you.